He's lived in the UK for all but a few months of his 55 years and served in the army. But Nick Monaghan from Worthing lost his job because he couldn't prove he was British. He was born in Nigeria and his problems began when he misplaced his old British passport. His MP has described his treatment as disgraceful. The Prime Minister's apology to Windrush migrants has prompted Mr Monaghan to speak out about his own situation. Sean Killick has the story.
Nicholas Monaghan has been watching the news with sympathy and a growing sense of frustration.
I want to apologise to you today because we are genuinely sorry for any anxiety that has been caused.
He was born in Nigeria, where his parents were temporarily working, but moved to the UK aged 6 months. He served in the British Army for 6 years, then worked continuously as an HGV driver, until 18 months ago, when new rules meant proving he was entitled to work in the UK. Despite having his old army ID card, he'd lost his birth certificate and passport when moving house, and says although the passport office would confirm he's on the system, it won't issue a replacement one without his birth certificate.
I'm good enough to serve in the army, but I'm not good enough to live here anymore, to work here. I've got pretty much nearly 40 years of nearly unbroken employment. I've paid my taxes, I've paid my way. Now I find myself sat at home sponging off the government, which sounds a little perverse really, I think.
And the oddity is that you're not allowed to work, but you can claim benefits.
It's crazy. It's my poor claims advisor at Worthing Job Centre, she doesn't know what to make of it.
Nicholas Monaghan's MP Tim Lawton says he's angry at what he describes as disgraceful bureaucratic nonsense.
I physically took the original documents to the Immigration Minister a few weeks ago, photographs of him at school reports, his national insurance payment records, his army credentials. She agreed that, yep, he looks pretty British, and I hope she's going to bring pressure to bear on the Passport Office to do the sensible thing, do the decent thing, recognise he's British, give him a passport and say sorry.
If I was Theresa May sitting here now, then what would you be saying to her?
Well, she needs to think again, she needs to look again, and I think that there's a case to be had in a lot of cases for some form of compensation. I think we're due it. You know, I had my job taken away for no reason at all. And I'm very, very angry. It was her that started it, and I think she's ultimately responsible for it.
Sean Killick, BBC South Today, Worthing.
Let's talk now to Doerfel, who is an immigration barrister. Thanks very much for joining us. I mean, the focus at the moment, quite rightly, is on the Windrush migrants, but there's still quite a lot of difficulty for others. I mean, how unusual is this case with Mr Monaghan?
Well, Sally, you're absolutely right. This case is unusual in the sense that Nick has been recognised by the authorities as being a British citizen because he has already previously been issued the British passport. And having been born by 2 British citizens abroad, he is British by descent. So there is actually no issue with his citizenship, and it's not quite clear why the Passport Office is refusing to issue another passport.
It does seem, though, that, you know, the clamping down on regulations, documentation and so on, if you're British, you've certainly got to prove it. And many of these people don't see themselves as immigration cases.
Well, that's absolutely right. And I think that is exactly that hostile environment that has been intentionally introduced. Now, in the past, you didn't necessarily need a British passport unless you wanted to travel. But now you need to prove it in order to be able to rent property, in order to open and retain your bank accounts, in order to access NHS treatment, you have to show you have a right to be here. And as Nick has experienced himself, you need to prove it to any employer. So if you want to be employed, you need to show a right to work here. And that means, in his case, the British passport. Otherwise, his employer is at risk of fines.
And just explain, I mean, as I understand it, it's going to get even harder with what they call the subject access request, which is going to close this whole loophole.
Indeed. At the moment, I would certainly advise Nick to make a subject access request to the Passport Office in order to get a copy of all the documents they hold on him. But the government is trying to make it difficult not for British citizens, but for other immigrants by introducing an exemption to the next Data Protection Act, which is supposed to come into force sometime this year, to exempt them from actually having access to their documents, which will make it even more difficult for them to establish as Nick wants to do, what's gone wrong and where are the decisions not properly taken.
Indeed, and so it will go on. Jan Doerfel, thank you so much for explaining a lot more about that. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Sally.
And just to say that the Home Office spokesman has said to us that Mr Monaghan was advised to get a replacement birth certificate from the authorities in Nigeria, but as far as it is aware, he has failed to do so.